Paradrama Tales. It started with a simple request. Her sister Emma called and asked if Ellie, her 11-year-old son, could stay at her place for a week in June. No big deal. She worked from home, had the space, and always liked having her nephew around. But then she asked why, and that's when the cracks began to show. Emma explained that she, her husband John, and their 5-year-old son AJ were going on a week-long family vacation to Disney World. She was giddy, rambling about character breakfasts and fireworks over the castle, how AJ was going to lose his mind when he saw Mickey Mouse in person. She listened, confused, until the most obvious question slipped out. Why isn't he going with you? There was a pause. Too long, and then Emma said it, blunt. Casual, like it made perfect sense. John's only paying for me and AJ. Ellie's not his kid. That was it, just like that Ellie. A sweet, bright, sensitive boy who had called John for nearly 8 years was being left behind. For Disney, she didn't scream, not yet. But she asked, as calmly as she could, "And you think that's okay?" Emma's answer: "He's not John's responsibility." What do you say to that? Because what she heard was louder than any excuse. You're not really one of us. You're not worth the ticket. And this time she couldn't stay quiet. Emma had always been a little reckless with her heart. She fell fast, trusted too easily, and often mistook control for security. That's how John came into the picture. Calm, confident, and 10 years older, with a steady job, a sharp haircut, and a quiet intensity that made him seem dependable. They met when Ely was just 3 years old. Emma had been struggling then, single, working odd jobs, juggling daycare and bills with a kind of frantic love that only young, scared mothers know. Ely's biological father had been gone before the baby could form memories. No calls, no child support, not even a birthday card, just gone. John, by comparison, felt like salvation. He had structure, savings, a plan. He offered Emma a life she didn't think she could give herself. And in time, she leaned all the way in. They moved in together, married, had another son, AJ, 2 years later. From the outside, it looked picture perfect. A blended family, 2 boys, a nice house, a stay-at-home mom, a working dad who always kept the lights on. But behind closed doors, the cracks were always there. John had never legally adopted Ely, and while he never said it out loud, he made it clear, in small, consistent ways, that Ely wasn't really his. He'd buy AJ expensive Christmas gifts while Ellie's were more practical. He'd refer to AJ as my son and Ely as Emma's boy. He'd talk about saving for AJ's college fund, but never mentions name in those conversations. Emma she didn't push. John paid the bills, he managed the bank account. He took care of everything, as she often reminded people. And for Emma, that became enough, or at least enough to stay quiet. She told herself it was normal, that Ellie didn't notice, that it wasn't personal. But it was. Ellie noticed everything. He noticed when John never showed up to school events, even though he always came for AJ's. He noticed that when AJ misbehaved, it was boys being boys. But when Ellie messed up, the punishment was harsher, stricter, sharper. And most of all, he noticed how his mom looked away when it happened. Emma wasn't cruel. She loved her son fiercely, in the way that mothers who've had to fight alone do. But over the years, she'd begun to treat Ellie like a problem to manage, not a child to protect. She rarely worked, said John preferred it that way. He liked his home a certain way, she once said, liked his wife available. She kept herself small to make the relationship fit. And in doing so, Willie had been asked silently to do the same, to make less noise, to ask for less. To understand that things were different now, and for the most part he did. Ely was quiet, polite, brilliant in ways that made teachers beam and adults pause. But he carried a weight, a tension in his shoulders that shouldn't live in a boy so young. He knew how to say, "It's fine," before anyone even asked. He knew how to disappear. And Emma, whether she realized it or not, had let that happen. She hadn't meant to choose between her son and her husband. But silence is a choice, and when she agreed to go on that vacation without him, when she let John draw the line between course and not ours, she made another choice, one that said more than words ever could. It was a casual call at first. Emma's voice had that familiar, airy tone she used when she needed something. She started with small talk, asked how work was going, whether the dog was still shedding like crazy. Then, after a pause just long enough to feel rehearsed, she slipped it in. "Hey, I was wondering, do you think you could watch Ely for a few days in June?" The question wasn't unusual. They were close, or at least had been once. Ely had stayed over before. He was easy, quiet, polite, always cleaned up after himself. Not the kind of kid you dreaded having around. So the answer came easily. "Well, of course," she said, going on. And that's when Emma's voice changed. Not guilty, but excited. Giddy, almost. "Oh, John surprised me with a trip to Disney. Just me and AJ. We're going for a whole week." She launched into details before the sentence could even land. character breakfasts, park hopper passes, matching t-shirts. She spoke like someone dreaming out loud, a mother imagining her picture perfect family vacation. Except something didn't make sense. "You mean all four of you?" she asked, interrupting gently. There was a pause, too long. "Again," Emma said, and suddenly her voice tightened. "Just me, John, and AJ." She felt her stomach drop. "Wait, what about Ailey?" Emma hesitated. Then, with a casualness that cut like glass, said, "John's only paying for us. He doesn't think it's fair to spend that kind of money on a kid who isn't his." She waited for her sister to say more, for an explanation, for an apology. But none came, just a breath. Then, "So I figured he could stay with you." It was quiet for a beat. Then she spoke, slowly, deliberately. "Emma, are you serious right now?" "What?" Emma snapped, suddenly defensive. "It's not like I have money to cover him. And John's already doing so much, he didn't have to take us at all." "But he didn't take all of you. He's leaving your son behind, your firstborn," Dostarma said. "You don't have kids. You don't understand." "No," she replied. "I don't have kids. But I do have a heart, and I know what this is going to do to Ely." Emma scoffed. "He's fine. He's not a baby. He'll have fun with you." "This isn't about fun," she said. "It's about what you're telling him, that he's less important, that he's not part of your family anymore." Emma went silent. Then, being dramatic, "No," she replied, voice low. "I'm being honest. Because someone in this family needs to be." Another pause. Then the final blow. Emma snapped, "You're such a judgmental bitch," and hung up. The call ended, but the weight of it lingered. She stared at the phone for a long time, her heart pounding, not from rage but from something deeper, something colder. Because for all her flaws, she never thought Emma would choose to leave her son behind. And yet here they were. She stared at her phone, heart racing, as the final words echoed in her ears. "You're such a judgmental bitch." That was how it ended. Not with regret, just a slur, just a hang up, just silence. But her mind wouldn't let it go. She replayed the conversation over and over again, not because she wanted to, but because it refused to leave her. The words that stuck the most weren't even Emma's. They were John's, as quoted second now. "He's not paying for that kid, not Ailey. Not your son, just a burden, a reminder, an inconvenience." She couldn't decide what hurt more, that John had said it, or that Emma had repeated it without shame. There was something devastating in how casually the words had come out, as if it were perfectly acceptable to draw a financial and emotional line through one of your own children. As if family was optional, as if a child's worth was up for debate. She thought about Ellie with his quiet voice and cautious smile. The way he always asked before reaching for seconds. The way he apologized when he hadn't done anything wrong. A boy so used to being careful, he didn't even know what it meant to feel safe. How could Emma not see it? How could a mother, any mother, justify leaving her child behind so she could ride roller coasters and snap Instagram photos with a man in a goofy suit? It wasn't about money, it was about message. And the message was brutal: you don't belong. She could already imagine how it would play out. Emma would talk about the vacation for weeks, the shows, the parades, AJ's wide eyes when he hugged Mickey. She would scroll through hundreds of photos, and Ely he'd smile, pretend he wasn't hurting, maybe even say, "I'm glad you had fun." Because that's what forgotten kids learn to do. Make their own heartbreak easier for everyone else. She wished she could protect him from that. But she wasn't his mother, and that was the part that cut deepest. Knowing that she would have done it differently if he were hers. She would have said no louder, walked away from any man who made her choose between love and loyalty. But Emma had chosen convenience, security, a man who held the wallet and called it love. And when challenged, when someone finally said out loud what needed to be said, Emma didn't defend Ailey, she defended him. John, the man who referred to her firstborn as that kid. It wasn't just neglect, it was betrayal. And it wasn't just John's voice that left the scar. It was Emma's silence. That silence had a shape now. It looked like an empty seat on a plane, an unused ticket, a child waving goodbye to his family from a different doorstep. She picked up her phone again. No messages, no apology, just that same hollow quiet that always seems to follow the truth. The kind of truth that's uncomfortable but necessary. She stood up, walked to the kitchen, and poured a glass of water with hands that still trembled. This wasn't just a fight between sisters. This was a line in the sand, a moment when someone, anyone, had to say, "This is not okay." And even if she was the only one willing to say it, she knew one thing for sure. She'd rather be called a bitch than stay silent while a child was left behind. She sat at her kitchen table later that night, lights low, fingers wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea she'd forgotten to drink. Her phone was dark, Emma hadn't called back. She wasn't expecting her to. But her mind wasn't on Emma, it was on Ellie, 11 years old. Too young to fully understand, but far too old to not feel it. She tried to imagine what Emma had told him. "You're staying with Auntie for a week? It'll be fun." She could picture the smile that probably followed. The forced cheer. The empty promise that this was just some little adventure. Just for him. But Ely wasn't a fool. He was the kind of kid who noticed when people stopped looking at him mid-sentence. The kind who hesitated before asking for things, like he was always calculating whether his wants were too much. She'd seen it in him for years. That carefulness, that quiet, it wasn't natural. It was learned. He'd learned it in small ways, when John called AJ buddy but rarely used Ellie's name, when Emma gushed over AJ's drawings but only nodded at Ellie's, when birthdays felt uneven, when love started looking conditional. And now this, a week-long Disney trip without him. No matter what excuse Emma fed him, the message had already landed. They're going, I'm not. And she wondered what that meant to an 11-year-old boy. Not in theory. In feeling. Did he think he'd done something wrong? Did he wonder if he just wasn't fun enough? Not lovable enough. Not his enough. She pictured him packing a small bag for her house, neatly folding his clothes, bringing his favorite book, maybe a game or two. Trying to be easy. Trying not to be a burden. Because that's what kids like Ellie do. They internalize what no one says out loud. They make themselves smaller in rooms that were never built to include them. She felt her throat tighten. She didn't have children of her own. But she understood one thing more than ever. There is nothing more brutal than a child realizing they are optional. And worse, pretending not to care, because Ely would do that. He would smile, say, it's okay, act excited to spend the week with her, and maybe, in some ways, he was excited. She'd make sure he had a good time. She always did, but it wouldn't erase the act, because deep down, some part of him would sit in bed at night and wonder, what would I have done differently to be invited? And that's what broke her. Not Emma's words, not John's cruelty, but the idea that Ely, who had asked for nothing, expected even less, was going to carry this memory like a splinter lodged too deep to pull out. She wouldn't be able to fix that. But she could do something. She could make her home feel safe. She could let him talk or stay silent. She could make pancakes for dinner if that's what he wanted. She could laugh too loud at his jokes and make sure he never had to ask twice to be seen. She couldn't undo what they were doing. But she could be the one person who didn't pretend it wasn't happening. Because Ely deserved that. He deserved someone who didn't ask him to be okay with being left behind. This didn't start with Disney. The pain, the favoritism, the slow erosion of Ely's place in the family, it had been building for years, quietly, consistently, in the kind of ways people excuse, overlook, or shrug off as just the way things are. And she had seen it. She hadn't always said something, but she saw it. She remembered the first time it felt off. It was Ely's 6th birthday. The first one after Emma had married John. She'd gone to the party, brought a big Lego set Ellie had been talking about for months. He was thrilled, but then John handed AJ, just a toddler at the time, a toy so he wouldn't feel left out. It was louder, flashier, and within minutes, all the adults had shifted their attention to AJ's squeals and giggles. Ellie sat quietly on the floor, trying to build a spaceship no one was watching him create. That was the first flicker. After that came the patterns. John started referring to AJ as my boy and Ely as the kid. He'd say things like, we're gonna AJ school thing, never, the boys' event, even when Ellie was performing too. He never hit Ely, never yelled. He didn't need to. His weapon was exclusion, precision-edged indifference. And Emma, she adjusted. Little things. She stopped asking John to attend Ellie's parent-teacher conferences. She talked less about Ely's hobbies and more about AJ's milestones. When money was tight, it was Ely's field trip that got cut. Never AJ's daycare fees, never John's weekend golf. She'd say it's not ideal, but John works hard, I have to pick my battles. She'd say, Ely's strong, he understands. But he shouldn't have had to understand. Not that young, not when it came to the love of a mother. She thought of the way Emma always framed things. Sacrifice for the sake of keeping the family together. Compromise so things would stay calm, as if protecting John's ego was worth more than protecting Ely's place. And it had worked, for a while, until this trip. Because a trip is visible, it's literal. You can't spin it. You can't hide the photos. You can't rewrite the fact that one child will be standing in a theme park hugging Mickey Mouse, and the other will be unpacking his pajamas in someone else's house. This was the moment the veil finally dropped, but the rot had been there all along. John had never stepped into fatherhood. Not really. He stepped into partnership with Emma and simply tolerated the child that came with her. And over time, Emma stopped expecting more. Stopped defending her son. Stopped remembering what he was owed. And the people around them most stayed quiet, because John was good to her, because the bills were paid, because things looked stable. But no one asked how stable a home really is when one child learns to flinch from invisibility. No one asked how much damage it does to grow up as the asterisk in your own family. This was never about Disney. This was about a slow, painful lesson being taught to Ely, your second. Always. And for her, the one watching from the outside, that truth was no longer something she could ignore. Because knowing it and staying silent made her complicit. And she wouldn't be that person anymore. She didn't call right away. She needed to cool down first, needed to find the line between speaking her truth and setting everything on fire. But by the next morning, the itch in her chest hadn't gone away. If anything, it had sharpened. She couldn't eat, couldn't work, couldn't think about anything except Ely packing his bag while his little brother got ready for the happiest place on earth. So she called. Emma answered on the third ring. Her tone was already defensive. "I don't want to fight," she said immediately. "Then listen," she replied, calm but firm. There was a pause. "Okay?" She took a breath, then another, and then she let it go. "Do you hear yourself? Emma, you're leaving your child behind. Your child, not a cousin, not a neighbor. Your son." Emma didn't respond. You keep saying John's not his dad, but you've been married for 7 years. He's raised AJ from birth and Ellie since he was 3. And now, because of money, or pride, or whatever twisted sense of logic you're clinging to, you're acting like Ely doesn't matter." Emma exhaled hard. "It's not like that." "Then tell me what it is like." Silence. She continued, voice trembling now, not from fear, but fury. "You keep saying you're doing your best. But your best would never let one of your kids feel like a leftover. Your best wouldn't let a man draw a line between the 2 boys who both call you mom." Emma finally spoke, quiet but sharp. "You don't get it." She laughed, bitterly. "No, I don't have kids. But I've a Lee. I've loved him like he was mine since the day he was born. I see him. I talk to him. I listen when he whispers things he's too scared to say out loud. I see the way he shrinks around John. I see how hard he tries not to need you." That last part landed. She could hear Emma's breathing shift. "You think you're protecting your marriage," she continued. "But you're sacrificing your son." Emma's voice cracked then. "I didn't mean to." "But you did. Not because she was cruel, but because she was tired, overwhelmed, dependent on a man who made her feel safe, even as he made her son feel disposable. Emma, I get it, you've had to survive. But you're not just a wife, you're a mother first. And Ely is watching you. Every single day he's learning what love looks like, and what it doesn't." She let that settle. And then, more softly now, "And one day, he's going to stop hoping you'll choose him." Emma didn't speak, so she said the last thing that needed to be said. "I'm keeping Ely next week. But not as a babysitter. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm doing what you should be doing. Giving him a home where he's not treated like an afterthought." A pause. "You can hate me for saying this, but someone in his life needs to stop pretending this is okay." Adama whispered, "I don't hate you." "I don't care if you do," she replied. "I care about Ely." And with that, she hung up, not out of anger, but out of resolve. Because sometimes love doesn't sound like support. Sometimes love sounds like calling someone out when they've forgotten who they're supposed to protect. The phone call ended, but the weight of it stayed with her. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just sat there in the stillness of her apartment, wondering what would happen next. Would Emma call back? Probably not. Would John hear about it? Definitely. Would anything change? She doubted it. But that wasn't the point anymore, because this wasn't about Emma, or John, or some picture-perfect idea of reconciliation. This was about Ely, a boy who was being dropped off like luggage, a boy who was being asked once again to adjust, to be grateful, to not ask why. And now, that boy was going to be staying with her for a week. She thought about what that would mean. She could take him to the park, cook his favorite meals, let him sleep in late, let him choose what movie to watch without negotiating with a younger sibling. She could laugh at his jokes without rushing him, let him take up space. But deep down, she knew that wouldn't be enough, because no matter what she did, she couldn't give him what he really wanted: to feel wanted by his own mother, to feel chosen, not accommodated, not tolerated. Chosen. So she asked herself the only question that mattered now: what do I do for him? How do you begin to undo the ache of being left behind? How do you love a child in a way that convinces them they were never the problem? She didn't have all the answers, but she knew where to start. She cleaned the guest room, not like a guest room, like his room. She pulled down the dusty Star Wars sheets he'd used the last time he stayed. She picked out a new book from the local shop, one she thought he might like, not to impress him, just to say, "I see you." She made a list of things they could do that week, but kept it flexible. Because maybe he wouldn't want to do anything. Maybe what he needed most was stillness, safety. Silence that wasn't cold. She also prepared herself for the hard parts. The moments when he might be quiet, when he might fake a smile, when he might say, "It's okay," with that look in his eyes that said it wasn't. She wouldn't press. But she would be there, not hovering, not fixing, just staying, because maybe that's what no one else had done for him yet. Not left, just stayed. She also made herself a quiet promise that for as long as he was under her roof, however long that might be, he wouldn't have to explain his feelings away. He wouldn't have to pretend he wasn't hurt, and he wouldn't have to earn affection. He could just be, and maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to plant something new in him. Not healing yet, but a seed. A start, because if no one else was going to remind Ellie that he mattered, she would. And she would start by doing the simplest, most radical thing an adult can do for a child who's been emotionally left behind: show up. Ellie's story wasn't rare. That's what haunted her most. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't an isolated lapse in judgment by one overwhelmed mother and one emotionally distant stepfather. It was a pattern, a quiet epidemic. There were thousands of Ellis, sitting at dinner tables where their chair always felt a little colder, standing in school hallways looking for a face that never came, watching half-siblings get more, be more, matter more, blended families, broken homes, step this, half that, and through it all a danger message that slips through the cracks. You're not really ours. Sometimes it's subtle. A smaller gift, a forgotten appointment, a tone of voice that's just a little sharper than the one used for real kids. Sometimes it's more obvious, like a trip to Disney World that leaves your name off the reservation. But the result is the same. Children learning too early and too deeply how to make sense of not being fully wanted. And here's the thing most people don't talk about: kids don't fight back. They fold, they adapt, they take the blame. They think, if I were better, they'd love me more. If I disappeared, things would be easier for them. And those thoughts don't just fade when they grow up, they become the voice inside their head for years to come. So when someone says, "It's just a vacation," or "They'll understand when they're older," what they're really saying is, "Their feelings are temporary. My convenience is forever," but they don't understand. Not when they're older. They remember. Because the kids who get left out don't just lose a moment. They lose a part of themselves. And what's worse, they're expected to be grateful for what little scraps of love they do receive. But children aren't charity. They are people, forming their sense of self in real time, using every cue we give them. So what happens to the forgotten kids? Some of them grow quiet. Some of them get angry. Some of them become adults who can't quite explain why they never feel good enough in relationships, why they flinch when someone raises their voice, why they crave validation from people who are emotionally unavailable. If they're lucky, find someone who sees them: a teacher, a coach, a friend's parent, a relative, someone who doesn't try to fix them or cover up the cracks or tell them to toughen up. Someone who simply says, "You matter." She couldn't rewrite Ailey's story. She couldn't change what had already been done. But she could make damn sure he didn't walk through that next week feeling invisible. She could feed him like he'd been starving for attention. She could laugh at his jokes until he believed he was funny again. She could listen, truly listen, until he stopped trying to edit himself. Because even if she wasn't his mother, she was something just as powerful: a witness who refused to look away. And maybe that was enough to shift something inside him, to remind him that he was still whole, still worthy, still someone's. Ely arrived with a small suitcase, a shy smile, and eyes that darted to the ground more than they met hers. He said, "Thanks for letting me stay," like he was asking for forgiveness. She hugged him a little tighter than usual and whispered, "You're always welcome here." And for the rest of that week, she did everything she could to show him what that meant. They made pancakes for dinner. They stayed up too late watching movies he picked. They didn't talk about Disney. They didn't need to. Because what he needed wasn't explanation. It was proof. Proof that someone saw him, chose him, thought he mattered. She gave him space, but she stayed close. He laughed a little louder each day, ate a little more, started talking without being asked. And on the final night, while brushing his teeth, he looked at her in the mirror and said, "This was the best week I've had in a long time." She smiled, held it together until he went to bed, and then cried quietly in the hallway, because it shouldn't have taken being left behind to finally feel seen. Ellie deserved more, from his mother, from his stepfather, from the world, and so do so many other kids just like him. If this story reminded you of someone you know, or someone you once were, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, share your story. Say the thing you needed to hear when you were that age. Because not every child gets a voice, but maybe they get you. Subscribe for more stories that speak to the quiet places. The ones that hurt, the ones that heal, the ones that remind us that being chosen shouldn't have to be earned. And to every forgotten kid out there, you always deserved more. And it's not too late to be reminded of that.